I was born in '86, so I'm as old as the movie. My favorite Autobots are... One of my favorite Decepticons is the one I'm transforming right here, and we owe his existence in part to you.
Who's that Transformer? It's Thunderwing!
Thunderwing. Excellent.
For a lot of the people out there who are only starting to read like the IDW relaunch, why don't you provide a synopsis of who you are in the Transformers universe?
I started very much just after Transformers itself started. I came into the offices of Marvel UK to meet with the editor of their quite new at the time Transformers comic, and they were looking to create original UK material to go hand in hand with the American material that they were reprinting in the title. So that, you know, they already had one story on the go with a writer called Steve Parkhouse called Man of Iron. And I was asked to come up with story ideas for the next little batch of originated material. So I pitched an idea for the Enemy Within. That went in issue 13, or started in issue 13 of Transformers UK. And since then, I've written, you know, hundreds and hundreds of stories for Marvel UK, Marvel US. I took over on the US comic from issue 56. Then I did Generation 2 for Marvel. Then I wrote the final episode of the Beast Wars animated show.
What possible reason do you have to disobey me? I am your master. I am your creator. And I have my own.
Picked up later with Convention Comics for BotCon, and then Dreamwave once they started up. And then from there, really, I helped kick off the IDW G1 universe back in 2005 with Chris Ryle. And since then, you know, on and off, I've worked on Transformers ever since, you know, going back to finish off the original Marvel series in Regeneration 1, and recently going back to the very beginning for Transformers Secrets and Lies, which is sort of a prequel, but it's more sort of threads into the events around the US issue 1 and that Man of Iron story. So that's my potted Transformers history. But, you know, I've been involved in games, you know, in the cartoon shows. So, you know, almost every facet of it.
A lot of the stuff you mentioned, I want to show you where it is in my collection.
Yep.
A masterpiece. This entire mini-series that you wrote, Simon, is one of my all-time favorites.
Well, I'm very pleased.
I also have the entire Regen, and I have the entire Generation 2. And one of the copies of the first.
I am Optimus Prime, and I send this message to any surviving Autobots taking refuge among the stars.
Let's start off with question 1. What led you to sci-fi in the first place?
You know, I think I was always a fan of sci-fi as a kid growing up. You know, I read a lot of comics and sci-fi, loved sci-fi movies. You know, I was, you know, a big fan of kind of the old and the current sci-fi movies I grew up with. So, you know, I mean, I always loved the medium. I read a lot, you know, I read a lot of Asimov and Philip K. Dick and, you know, many other sci-fi authors. So, you know, I was immersed from the start, and I don't think I particularly gravitated towards sci-fi. You know, what I love is, you know, crime and noir fiction more than anything. But, you're just exposed to it. And, when you love comics, you kind of love sci-fi as well, because the two often go hand in hand.
Who's that transformer? It's Nightbeat.
So your love for the noir, was that what gave rise to Nightbeat?
Yeah, certainly. I got when I did Matrix Quest, I got to dip into all sorts of genres, and Nightbeat just seemed to fit the crime genre. And we did a little 2-part one in the UK with him as well, where he's very much in sort of Raymond Chandler, hard-boiled private eye mode. So, it's just a little bit of fun. But yeah, I love crime noir stuff. So it was fun just to do some nods to that in Transformers with Nightbeat.
Familiar with a voice actor named Jeffrey Combs?
I'm familiar with the name. I've never met him, but...
He was the one who played Ratchet in the Align continuity.
Okay.
He's the voice I always picture when I think of Nightbeat.
Yeah.
Mainly for his role as the Question in Justice League Unlimited.
But that your father was himself a powerful crime boss. You were just a child. You certainly didn't understand what your father did for a living. You just knew that when he talked, people listened.
Yeah, good call.
And one of my all-time favorite Autobots is this guy. And I made sure to Furmanize him for today's...
It's very Generation 2 version.
Yeah, Generation 2 is how I got into Transformers in the first place. It was around 93. I was in like second or third grade, and it was on TV.
Hey, don't flip out. Transformers Generation 2 will be right back.
Yeah.
And I was just past the deadline of when the VHSs of the original series were sold. And the first one that I ever had was SOS Dinobots I used to watch with my big brother. I've interviewed Michael Bell, Greg Berger, and Lee Takar in the past, and John Paul. And so it's wonderful to have you as the 5 golden rings.
Well, pleased to be here.
Growing up, do you remember the first comic book you ever owned?
I would have started with probably something like the Beano or the Dandy when I was a young kid. Kids, more sort of cartoonish comic strips. But, pretty soon I graduated to first the sort of more British action adventure comics like Valiant and Smash and Lion. And then from there, I found the reprints of Marvel comics. They used to sort of repackage them as titles like Fantastic and Terrific. And then finally we got Mighty World of Marvel and Spider-Man Comics Weekly. And I think that's when I really sort of my interest in comics took off, with the Marvel comics side of things and Spider-Man in particular.
I remember my first comic was Sonic the Hedgehog #8.
Right.
Not the Fleetway, the Archie.
Yes.
Is Fleetway a comic that's based in the UK?
Yeah, Fleetway, they for a while they published 2000 AD and a few other comics like that. But yeah, they're a UK company.
And when you were at the helm of Generation 2, you oversaw the US Marvel. And did you do the same with Fleetway?
Not so much. I mean, Fleetway only had a very sort of brief dabbling with Transformers with their Generation 2 comic, which didn't last, well, in terms of original material, it was only 2 issues. And so, I don't think I really had much more to do with that than literally just writing those couple of strips that were new to the comic. But no, I didn't really have anything to do much with the editorial side or direction of Fleetway's Transformers comic.
Apart from the Nelson Shin link, do you think that Transformers as a series, not just the original G1 cartoon, do you think it borrows a lot from Star Wars?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the success of Star Wars and the whole big intergalactic backstory idea was very influential on the fact that Hasbro went to Marvel and said, create us a a backstory, a sweeping epic space opera. And I think that they understood that that's what kids wanted. They wanted a whole storyline behind the toy line. So I think Star Wars definitely opened the door to that possibility. And so, yeah, I don't think it borrows from Star Wars. It feels very much its own entity, Transformers. And Star Wars, I just think, sort of laid the door open for that.
I agree. The only thing that I know borrows from it was some of the sound effects for like the Autobot and Decepticon weapons were from Industrial Light and Magic.
New force in the universe, a monster planet that devours everything in its path, and it's heading for the small planet of Cybertron.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, that's entirely possible.
Well, once the doors open, it's fair game as long as it's, part of the fair use way that it's used. As a writer for a comic series, what are like the roles that you play as far as the creativity of the actual universe itself? Do you oversee like the aesthetic and art elements of it, or do you leave that up to the artists?
It depends how involved I am. When I was at Marvel UK, I was also an editor. So I was very involved with the artists and the art direction. But nowadays, not so much, I mean, except for the fact that I know a lot of the artists and it's much easier to communicate with artists now, even if they're, I'm in the UK and they're in America. So, I mean, but generally I trust the artists, especially these days, to know what they're doing far better than I do when it comes to the visual side of it. So no, I tend to write the stories and then just be there if the artist wants to bounce ideas off me or, suggest revisions or need clarification. But, the artists, I mean, they do the job so well. I never really thought, on Secrets and Lies, I needed to do more than drop some notes into the scripts for Guido to get him to completely get what was happening. But, occasionally John Paul would contact me and just check a detail about the colouring of a certain character. And, sometimes say, well, if this character's here, how does that work? And so, it's always good when there's a degree of being in contact with the artists so they can run stuff by you.
In the past couple of months, I tried to track down some of the UK works.
Sure.
And while the aesthetics are, different than what I'm used to, it's a very appreciable work.
Yeah, I mean, the UK, we were forced more or less to have a team of artists, really, because it was a weekly comic. Mm-hmm. We couldn't rely on, one artist for a long stretch. So, we had a range of artists back in the day, and their styles were often quite unique. Jeff Senior was very different to Jeff Anderson. Dan Reed was very different to Andrew Wildman. But it just made for a nice variety of artists on each storyline. They all brought their unique style to it. I mean, it's nowadays, compared to the artists working on it, it's, I suppose, a more simplistic style of the Transformers. The artists now draw every detail, accurately, whereas the UK artists were drawing from the animation model sheets largely. I suppose, there just wasn't that call for the level of precise detail there is now. But, it was great, and I think, some of the artists who came out of that, Jeff Senior and Andrew Wildman, just continued on into future sort of parts of the comic storytelling.
I think all three of them had work done in this one too, right?
Yes, that's right. Well, Andrew did most of Regeneration 1 before Guido sort of took in because Andrew became too busy. But then, yes, Andrew came back in for a part of issue 100, and we had Jeff, of course, pitching in too on that one. And we did the 0 issue, which brought artists like Jeff Anderson back in to do some art for us, and Jose Delbo. So, again, it was great just to involve as many people from the original run as possible.
So it was like a class reunion of sorts.
Yeah, very much like that, and I think also it gave, we tried to assign the little stories in the Zero issue to the artists most suited to those parts of the story, because he's jumping around in time in the storyline. So we got Jose to do the one that ties in more to Buster and Buster Witwicky and that era of things. Jeff Anderson did the more Cybertronian based one. So it was just fun to be able to bring different artists, and we even got Nick Roach to do the more sort of animated movie tie-in episode of that issue. So yeah, it was great to be able to do that Zero issue and involve a lot of different artists in it.
That was a very interesting approach, to have Megatron lobotomize all of the Decepticons under his command, apart from Shockwave, who was still a part of the Ark, and Starscream, who he kept alive just minimally to make him suffer.
I think it was good to show Megatron, really be, as bad as he could be. Sometimes that was very tempered, or, you never really got the idea of how dangerous he could be. And I think with Regeneration 1, I really wanted to tie that, better and make it him seem more of that character, and yeah, I think we just had to show him as really being a massive threat.
Also, that he had a major weakness that you had in plain sight.
Yeah. Oh, and and also that tied into the original run,
issue 70.
Yeah, exactly. So the whole thing was, the first story in Regeneration 1 is called Loose Ends, and it was very much about, as well as telling a new story, tying up all those sort of threads from the original series.
The storylines that you penned, those were they and Secrets and Lies are, in my opinion, some of your best work.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I always try and put 100% into them, and I really enjoyed the chance to finish off the series with Regeneration 1, and Secrets and Lies was a joy to do, just because you could fill in some, the first issue of the Marvel US comic, zips through events in the first couple of pages, which left me plenty of wriggle room to go in and create new story within that framework without, changing anything. I could show extra detail and go a little deeper into what was happening at the time. So it was a fun series to do, and halfway through we got the idea of looping Man of Iron, the first UK story, into that as well. So it took some head scratching to make it work, but I think we got there in the end.
So with the Man of Iron, is that Cloudraker or Fastlane?
Yeah, I mean, basically we had to, when that story was done, Man of Iron, the creators have been told to make it very self-sufficient and not to impact on the US continuity. So there was no real detail on who the Man of Iron was, and all I did was try and assign some characters to those bots, so it fitted neater or more neatly into the US continuity, because Man of Iron was the only story that the US comic reprinted for a couple of issues. So it felt good to make it mesh a little closer with what, the bigger Transformers universe that came about over the course of both comics.
You had a significant role in the history of the G1.
Yeah.
By adding these guys.
Who's that Transformer? It's Starsaber.
The first time ever on US soil.
Yep. Well, that was, one of the things I needed for Secrets and Lies were characters who hadn't featured in the original G1 comic book because they were all on Earth or, in the Ark.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very much trying to find characters to make their debut in the comic book. And that was part of the challenge of finding, the likes of Fastlane and Cloudraker and other characters. And of course, Punch, Counterpunch, who hadn't featured in the original comic and then could become a more pivotal part of the Secrets and Lies storyline.
And that's another reason why I want to thank you.
Okay, thank you.
One of my all-time favorites. Transformers Generation 2. G-Axis, the Swarm, the gritty 1990s feel. I leave that as an open question for you to explain.
Well, I mean, Generation 2 started with the idea that, we would do 12-issue sort of series within series and keep expanding the scope of the series. But in the end, we only got to do the first 12 issues. So, you only get a hint of the Liege Maximo at the end. And, we tried to tie it up as neatly as possible. But, Generation 2 was always meant to be a little more, in your face. The comics in the 90s were little more like that. And we didn't just want to do a straight continuation of G1. So it came in with its own flavor, its own look, and that was helped considerably by the artist Eric Yaniger, who really sort of brought an art aesthetic to the series that really sustained it throughout its run, even though he dropped away from the comic quite a bit just because of deadlines and schedules. But overall, it gave it a flavor and an integrity of its own, I think, just that art style. And, if we had a chance to continue, we would have just kept expanding the scope of it. So, the first one was very much like you think you know everything, but there's a lot more, for the characters and the reader. And we were going to keep pulling back the focus with each subsequent story arc. But like I say, we never really got to do that next story arc. And in the end, the stuff I had planned got turned into a kind of fan fiction for one of the UK conventions.
So the creation of Liege Maximo means that you created one of, if I'm not mistaken, like the second of the 13 primes, the first one being Alpha Trion, played by John Stevenson in the G1.
Returned to find a cure for this war plague. Can you help me, Alpha Trion? There is a cure. I know nothing of it. Then I must journey farther back.
Sure, yeah. These things, I'm always very flattered when these things become part of the larger Transformers mythos. Everything we create just becomes part of the Hasbro universe of Transformers. So when they get adopted into other storylines, other media with Transformers, it's always very satisfying to see that, Primus and the 13 and Liege Maximo and G-Axis, these characters have lived on after those original series and are now, fixtures and fittings of the whole, Transformers universe, which, like I say, is very flattering and satisfying that, you feel you've contributed elements to the whole thing it is now, which is huge.
There is a writer in the US who is part of Sonic the Hedgehog, Ken Penders.
Okay.
You are, in essence, the polar opposite of him, and the reason why you have my respect, because he sued Archie Comics over the characters that he created, and it was because of him that Archie had to take the series and reformat it, and destroyed countless characters in the process.
Yeah.
So one of the things I respect about you is you let characters that you created live on after your role in the mythos was either hiatused or moved on to someone else.
treacherous. One moment you're lost in a carnival of delights, with the poignant childhood aromas, the flashing neon puberty, all that sentimental candy floss. The next, it leads you somewhere you don't want to go, somewhere dark and cold and filled with damp, ambiguous shapes of things you'd hope were forgotten. The memories can be vile, repulsive little brutes, like children, I suppose.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we don't own these characters. When we are working for Marvel, or you're working sort of for Marvel under license to Hasbro, these aren't your characters. You can either go one way, which is just to not create new characters at all, or just feel comfortable adding to it and bringing in your own ideas, in the knowledge that you don't own these. They just become part of that universe. So, it's nice every now and then just to have an acknowledgement that that's where they came from originally. But, I'm quite happy with the fact that I've contributed to such a big, sort of phenomenon now. And however, many years we're in, 36, 7 years, worth of storytelling, and I'm happy there's some of me in there.
So 1997 BotCon. Last night I did research on TF Wiki before I came up with these questions. It said that it paved the way for you to go to Titan Comics and then Dreamwave. What was it about that BotCon that cemented it for you?
I mean, that was great. I mean, that was my first exposure to fandom as such. When we were doing the comic, even the G2 comic, mostly the only feedback you got was reader letters to the comic. There was no internet, all pre-internet. So we didn't really have a kind of idea of, there were people out there who not only enjoyed it at the time, but carried that torch on. So it was a big thing. And, for various reasons, BotCon 97 was wow, there are fans out here, and Transformers is ongoing. And, we got to meet all the Beast Wars team, Bob Forward and Larry DiTilio were there, some of the cast, Venus Terzo, David Kay. And it was fascinating Andrew was with me at this convention, Wildman, and it was fascinating for both of us just to witness what Transformers had become while we kind of weren't looking. We got invited to do the comic for that convention and then to come out for the convention itself. It was an eye-opener for us, really. And, from that is where I got, friendly with Bob Forward and Larry, and that led to me writing, the final episode of Beast Wars Season 3. And really the convention comics and this idea that there was a fandom out there, made me sort of aware of the audience for maybe reprinting those original Marvel stories. Marvel didn't anymore own those stories. They'd reverted to Hasbro. So, I just took the idea to Titan of doing collected editions of the UK and the US material. And, they were very receptive of that. And part of them being receptive to that was their understanding of this fandom that was growing out there at the time. We tested the water a bit, but very quickly it became apparent that there was a real hunger for these stories in collected editions. They'd never been collected at the time. And in some ways we got in just before Dreamwave rebooted things in comics. So it was, fortuitous, really, because it might have been a clash otherwise. But the fact that Titan already had the license to reprint made it, sort of possible for us, to get all those collected editions out there. And it was fortuitous. And then suddenly the whole Dreamwave thing happened, which of course just made Transformers even bigger. In the public consciousness, certainly in the comics buying public consciousness. And so, yeah, the Titan editions, we were able to do all of G1, all of G2, and all the UK material, or a large part of it. So yeah, it was all good timing, really, and that so much was generated by those fan conventions that I went to in the late 90s.
I agree.